What if the very thing you've been hiding, your vulnerability, is the key to courage, connection, and true success? Welcome to Summarize, where every great book is transformed into powerful, clear, and easy-to-digest audio summaries. Save time, learn faster, and upgrade your mind, one book at a time. This is Summarize, Wisdom Made Simple. Daring Greatly book by Brene Brown. The title Daring Greatly is inspired by a speech delivered by Theodore Roosevelt in 1910, often referred to as the man in the arena. Roosevelt praises those who step into the arena of life, who strive, fail, fall, and rise again, rather than those who criticize safely from the sidelines. Brene Brown uses this metaphor to frame the central theme of the book. True courage is found in vulnerability, not in emotional armor or perfection. Brown defines daring greatly as having the courage to show up and let ourselves be seen, even when there are no guarantees. It means engaging in life fully, emotionally, and honestly, rather than protecting ourselves from disappointment, criticism, or failure by remaining closed off. The book challenges one of the most deeply ingrained cultural beliefs, that vulnerability is weakness. Through years of research involving thousands of interviews, Brown argues the opposite. Vulnerability is the greatest measure of courage. The cultural myth, vulnerability equals weakness. From a young age, people are taught to suppress vulnerability. Phrases like "don't cry," "man up," "be strong," and "don't let them see you fail" reinforce the idea that emotional exposure is dangerous. Brown explains that this belief is not only false, but deeply harmful. Vulnerability is not oversharing, being weak, being naive, letting people walk over you. Instead, vulnerability is emotional risk, uncertainty, exposure, the willingness to show up without control over the outcome. Brown emphasizes that vulnerability is unavoidable. Love, creativity, innovation, trust, and leadership all require vulnerability. The only way to avoid vulnerability is to disengage from life itself. Scarcity culture, never enough. One of the most important concepts introduced early in the book is scarcity culture. Brown explains that modern society operates on a mindset of never enough. People constantly feel not good enough, not successful enough, not attractive enough, not productive enough. This scarcity mindset fuels comparison, perfectionism, and fear. When people believe they are not enough, they armor themselves emotionally to avoid judgment and shame. Scarcity culture makes vulnerability feel dangerous because it convinces us that exposure will confirm our unworthiness. Shame versus guilt, a critical distinction. A core foundation of daring greatly is understanding shame and how it differs from guilt. Guilt, I did something bad. Shame, I am bad. Guilt can be healthy. It encourages accountability and growth. Shame, however, attacks identity and self-worth. It thrives in secrecy and silence. Brown's research shows that shame is universal but rarely discussed. Everyone experiences it, yet most people believe they are alone in their shame. Vulnerability becomes frightening because shame whispers, "If people see the real you, you'll be rejected. You're not worthy of love or belonging." Armor, how we protect ourselves from vulnerability. When faced with shame and fear, people instinctively put on emotional armor. Brown identifies common forms of armor that people use to protect themselves from vulnerability. 1. Perfectionism. Perfectionism is not about self-improvement. It is about self-protection. It says, "If I do everything perfectly, I can avoid criticism and shame." In reality, perfectionism increases anxiety, blocks creativity, prevents connection, leads to burnout. 2. Foreboding joy. When something good happens, people anticipate disaster. They brace themselves emotionally, believing that joy makes them vulnerable to pain. 3. Numbing. People numb vulnerability through distractions, overworking, binge-watching, excessive social media use, substance abuse, or constant busyness. 4. Cynicism and coolness. Some people protect themselves by appearing emotionally detached, sarcastic, or above it all. This creates distance and prevents deep connection. While armor feels safe, Brown explains that what protects us from pain also blocks love, joy, creativity, and belonging. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation and creativity. Brown emphasizes that creativity cannot exist without vulnerability. Every act of creativity involves risk, putting an idea, emotion, or perspective into the world without knowing how it will be received. Innovation requires uncertainty, trial and error, failure, feedback. Organizations and individuals who fear vulnerability avoid risk, leading to stagnation. Conversely, those who embrace vulnerability create environments where creativity and innovation thrive. Courage and vulnerability are not opposites. One of the book's most powerful insights is that courage and vulnerability are inseparable. Courage does not exist without vulnerability. Examples of courageous acts that require vulnerability: saying, "I love you" first, apologizing sincerely, asking for help, trying something new, speaking up against injustice. Every act of courage involves emotional exposure and risk. Brown reframes courage as the willingness to show up despite fear. The arena, showing up fully. Returning to Roosevelt's metaphor, Brown explains that life rewards those who enter the arena, even if they stumble. The critics on the sidelines may judge, but they do not experience growth, connection, or fulfillment. Daring greatly means accepting that failure is part of growth, choosing authenticity over approval, valuing courage over comfort. The greatest regret, Brown argues, is not failure, but never showing up at all. Wholehearted living begins with vulnerability. Brown introduces the concept of wholehearted living, which means engaging with life from a place of worthiness. People who live wholeheartedly believe they are enough, even when they fail. Vulnerability is the gateway to wholehearted living. Without it, relationships remain shallow, creativity is stifled, and leadership becomes control-driven rather than trust-based. Understanding shame at a deeper level. In Daring Greatly, Brene Brown places shame at the center of human disconnection. Shame is the fear of disconnection, the belief that something about us makes us unworthy of love, belonging, or acceptance. Brown explains that shame is universal, intensely painful, rooted in social expectations. Despite being universal, shame is rarely discussed openly. This silence allows it to grow stronger. Shame is not the same as embarrassment or guilt. While embarrassment is temporary and guilt can lead to growth, shame attacks identity. It convinces individuals that they are fundamentally flawed. Shame triggers and expectations. Brown identifies that shame is closely tied to unrealistic and conflicting expectations placed on individuals by society, families, and institutions. Common shame triggers include body image and appearance, parenting and family roles, career success and financial status, gender expectations, relationships, and emotional expression. People internalize these expectations and judge themselves harshly when they fall short, even when the standards are impossible to meet. The Shame Resilience Framework. Brown introduces shame resilience as the ability to recognize shame, move through it constructively, and emerge with self-worth intact. Shame resilience does not eliminate shame. It changes how we respond to it. The 4 elements of shame resilience are: 1. Recognizing shame triggers. Understanding what situations, comments, or expectations activate shame allows individuals to respond consciously instead of reacting automatically. 2. Practicing critical awareness. This involves questioning whether the expectations driving shame are realistic, attainable, or fair. 3. Reaching out. Shame thrives in isolation. Speaking about shame with trusted individuals creates empathy and connection. 4. Speaking shame. Naming shame reduces its power. When shame is spoken, it loses its ability to define identity. How emotional armor shows up in relationships. Brown explains that many relationship struggles stem from emotional armor, the defenses people use to avoid vulnerability. In romantic relationships, armor appears as avoidance of difficult conversations, emotional withdrawal, defensiveness, blame. Rather than expressing fear, sadness, or insecurity, people often express anger or indifference. This blocks intimacy and trust. Vulnerability, by contrast, requires honest communication, emotional risk, openness to rejection or misunderstanding. True connection only happens when people allow themselves to be seen fully. The myth of going it alone. One of the most damaging beliefs in modern culture is the idea that strong people should handle everything on their own. Brown challenges this myth directly. Asking for help is not weakness. It is an act of courage and trust. Research shows that people who ask for help build stronger relationships, experience less shame, develop resilience. Interdependence, not independence, is the foundation of meaningful connection. Vulnerability in parenting, raising wholehearted children. Brown devotes a significant portion of the book to parenting, emphasizing that children learn vulnerability and courage not from lectures, but from observation. Parents who shame children, demand perfection, avoid difficult emotions, unintentionally teach children that vulnerability is unsafe. Instead, wholehearted parenting requires modeling self-compassion, allowing children to experience failure, teaching emotional literacy, creating a culture of worthiness at home. Children raised in environments of empathy and acceptance develop resilience and confidence. Shame and gender expectations. Brown highlights how shame operates differently but powerfully across genders. Men are often shamed for showing vulnerability, fear, or emotional pain. Women are often shamed for asserting themselves, taking up space, or not meeting appearance standards. Despite these differences, shame's impact is universal. It disconnects people from their authentic selves. Brown argues that dismantling shame requires challenging cultural norms and encouraging emotional expression for all genders. Vulnerability in the workplace. Many organizations mistake vulnerability for weakness and rely on fear, control, and perfectionism to drive performance. Brown's research shows that this approach is deeply flawed. Healthy workplaces are built on trust, open communication, psychological safety, leaders who dare greatly, admit mistakes, ask for feedback, encourage innovation, create space for learning. Fear-based cultures may produce short-term results, but they destroy morale, creativity, and loyalty over time. Engagement over disengagement. When people feel shamed or fearful at work, they disengage emotionally. This disengagement leads to low productivity, burnout, lack of innovation. Engagement, on the other hand, requires vulnerability. Employees must feel safe enough to share ideas, take risks, and be authentic. The cost of armored leadership. Armored leadership relies on command and control tactics, avoidance of feedback, emotional distance. Brown argues that this style creates fear rather than respect. True leadership is relational and rooted in trust. Leaders who model vulnerability set the tone for the entire organization. Daring leadership, vulnerability as strength. Brene Brown challenges the traditional image of leadership as control, authority, and emotional distance. In Daring Greatly, she argues that the most effective leaders are not those who avoid vulnerability, but those who embrace it. Daring leaders are honest about uncertainty, admit mistakes, ask for input and feedback, create environments of trust. Rather than pretending to have all the answers, vulnerable leaders invite collaboration. This openness builds credibility and psychological safety, allowing teams to innovate and take meaningful risks. Brown emphasizes that vulnerability in leadership is not about oversharing personal emotions. It is about clarity, courage, and accountability. Trust is built in small moments. Trust, according to Brown, is not created through grand gestures, but through small, consistent actions. It grows when leaders and individuals follow through on commitments, set clear boundaries, show empathy, communicate honestly. When trust is broken, people retreat into armor, disengaging emotionally and protecting themselves. Rebuilding trust requires vulnerability, patience, and integrity. Without trust, relationships, teams, and organizations cannot function effectively. The courage to give and receive feedback. One of the most practical sections of the book focuses on feedback. Brown explains that feedback is inherently vulnerable, both for the giver and the receiver. Healthy feedback cultures focus on growth, not blame, are grounded in respect and empathy. Separate behavior from identity. Brown introduces the idea that only feedback from people who are in the arena truly matters. Critics who do not participate, contribute, or take risks should not determine our self-worth. Receiving feedback requires courage because it exposes imperfection. Giving feedback requires courage because it risks discomfort and conflict. Vulnerability and accountability go together. A common misconception is that vulnerability eliminates accountability. Brown argues the opposite. True accountability requires vulnerability. Accountability means owning mistakes, apologizing sincerely, making amends, learning and improving. Leaders and individuals who avoid vulnerability often avoid accountability as well, deflecting blame or denying responsibility. Wholehearted living revisited. Returning to the concept introduced in The Gifts of Imperfection, Brown reinforces that wholehearted living is grounded in worthiness. Wholehearted individuals believe they are enough, engage in life fully, embrace uncertainty, practice courage daily. Vulnerability is the gateway to wholehearted living. Without it, people remain guarded, disconnected, and fearful of failure. The price of avoiding vulnerability. Brown clearly outlines the cost of avoiding vulnerability. Disconnection in relationships, fear-based leadership, stagnation and lack of creativity, emotional numbness. When people armor themselves, they may feel protected, but they lose access to love, joy, and meaning. Daring greatly in everyday life. The book emphasizes that daring greatly is not a one-time act. It is a daily practice. It shows up in having difficult conversations, asking for help, setting boundaries, trying again after failure, choosing authenticity over approval. Each act of vulnerability strengthens resilience and self-trust. Criticism, failure, and the arena. Brown returns to Roosevelt's man in the arena metaphor, reminding readers that criticism is inevitable when we show up and try. The question is not how to avoid criticism, but whose criticism matters. The opinions that matter come from people who are also vulnerable, engaged, and courageous. Failure is not evidence of inadequacy. It is proof of effort. Redefining success and courage. Success, in Brown's framework, is not measured by perfection or approval. It is measured by willingness to show up, commitment to values, courage in uncertainty. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action in the presence of fear. Daring greatly is a powerful call to reject the myth that vulnerability is weakness and to embrace it as the most accurate measure of courage. Brene Brown shows that whether in leadership, relationships, parenting, or personal growth, the willingness to be seen, without guarantees, opens the door to connection, trust, and meaning. By stepping into the arena of life, shedding emotional armor, and choosing authenticity over self-protection, we reclaim our worth and our voice. The book's enduring truth is clear. The greatest risk is not failing or being criticized, but never daring to show up at all. You just listened to Summarize. If you enjoyed this summary, support the channel by liking and subscribing. It helps the knowledge reach more people. Until next time, keep learning.